It was not months, it was years just building the foundation. We just had to hit such a high quality bar with the visuals of the game.
This is Halldór, the director of Echoes of the Endgame. With a team of just 40 people in Iceland, they were able to build a cinematic adventure game similar to the levels of Witcher, God of War and Uncharted. In this episode, you'll know how they rewrote the entire narrative of the game, built a brand new mythology, and challenged themselves to show how smaller studios can make games just as powerful as a AAA title. Was narrative single player always in the mind when you were making this game?
It was definitely, when we started, we were very keen on making a single player kind of classic era game. Like we were kind of thinking back to the almost like PS3, PS4 era type titles, because that's the kind of games that we really love. And you can probably see some of that in the game and kind of how it's structured and how it's laid out. When we initially set out, we definitely had plans to make like this kind of category, this type of game from the very get-go.
How did you even figure out to find out like this right set of people in the team? Because there's 40 developers, as far as I know, were they already in with this concept? Like, how does that thing works?
Well, the challenges for us were really that, when we founded the studio, me and my co-founders were just out of university. We met in uni and we hadn't made any game before really, except for student projects. So for us, it was an uphill battle from the get-go. But we knew that we would have to really prove ourselves, to have even a chance of making this game. And initially, we didn't really have any funding to start with. So it was literally me and my two co-founders all in a place in our lives where we could take a big risk like this and really commit to something without ever knowing that it might ever come to fruition or come out. So we're really happy to be at the tail of that. Once we started, telling our friends and stuff like that. And because there were no other studios like this in Iceland, people just kind of found out before we even had funding and they wanted to be a part of it. So we actually grew to like more than 10 people before we could really pay any salaries or anything like that, of just like super passionate people who wanted to make this game.
I'm always curious about like, how did you even figure out like the concept of what this game is going to be? Like, where does that start? Like, how does that even evolve into what it is now?
When we started, we initially held what we call lore nights. We kind of had a night where we just invited creative people and friends and the early employees in the company to just kind of sit together and brainstorm. We knew the criteria that we wanted to make a fantasy game, and we wanted to be in a new fictional setting that wasn't built on any pre-existing mythology or pre-existing IPs or anything like that. We just kind of wanted to strike out on our own. This is actually where our senior writer came in. He had this like great groundwork just for the game setting in the world. And we were so like interested in what he was kind of expressing that we ended up talking about that idea the entire night instead of running through everybody's ideas. That eventually turned into a full-time job for him. And that to us building prototypes and for the funding. So even if we had those early ideas right at the start, it definitely took so many iterations for that idea to become what the game is.
The game has gone like kind of that the story was rewritten and it was like reworked in a way. Why was that a case to kind of rework? And because you've already worked on this game before and then you have to kind of start again in some ways.
We wrote these different drafts for the game. And when we read them, we kind of read them and we went through them here internally. And we realized that the way that the story was being told in the previous scripts was not really portraying the character that we really wanted to portray in terms of the evolution throughout the game and the story arcs. Ultimately, we also just had, I think, too many characters originally in the script where, first of all, we're a smaller studio, a very small studio, so we had to think about scope, but that wasn't really the core of the issue. It's more like, okay, we want to make sure that we land this A-plot for the game without worrying too much about, adding all these complications into that mix as well. So that all led to us choosing to do a rewrite. But it was a tough decision at the time. We were like really looking at it and thinking, should we do this or shouldn't we do this? But I'm glad that we did, because I think, being okay with putting things away and then coming back at them fresh just means that you take all the best elements out of the old thing and harden them into this new thing.
As I'm playing the game and as I'm exploring the combat and the conversations that I'm having with the Abram, like it kind of like very much reminded me of God of War specifically. So was that a game that was taken as the major inspirations, or were there other things that were also inspired? I don't know, Lord of the Rings was also something that you guys have talked about before. So like what were kind of the inspirations here?
Definitely me and the writers kind of both had our own coming into this. For me, it was definitely like Lord of the Rings was one of the big things. It's one of my favorite franchises ever, and I wanted to create a fantasy setting, kind of in the same fantasy level, but still quite distinct. I think the writers definitely had some books. I can't remember the name of the book, kind of drawing some things from, but it evolved so much that you couldn't really connect the dots from this point. But in terms of games, we definitely liked the story structure of more intimate relationships of the two main characters. So God of War is an example. Last of Us is an example. We also wanted to make sure that we portray a different relationship entirely. We've seen in those games kind of a parent and a child. We kind of are looking for a story that is between these two adults who are having to go through hardships and learn to work together and learn to trust one another. So we decided to take a kind of a different relationship arc between them. And that was tricky, for sure.
Yeah, I like the fact that it was not another father-son, father-daughter kind of like relationship. It was like between two adults. And I like that fact. And what, according to you, is like the biggest kind of struggle that you or as a team in general had to face?
There were so many struggles. This was early days of Unreal Engine coming into existence. To make a game like this, we kind of had to learn the ropes of how to use motion capture. We had to build our own motion capture studio. And make sure that we record body performances, voice performances, face performances all at once with multiple actors and props. We also had to kind of learn how to make gameplay animations. We had to learn how to really employ photogrammetry because we scanned most of the content in the game just here in Iceland. And so we kind of went from scanning like single rocks in our neighborhood to eventually scanning whole mountains in Iceland and then ultimately a glacier as well to put into the game. When you're making a first game as a studio, you're having to invent so much. You're having to invent the AI system. You're having to invent the combat system, the platforming system. So really all those systems for a game of this breadth, it was a very big challenge to make those systems like come together in the first place and then make sure that they were tight enough to feel good and really kind of harmonized with each other.
In general, do you think like how was the state of like video game development and how is changing as compared to how people see AAA games at this point?
When we started, our entire bet was that there was going to be an evolution in the gaming industry where smaller studios would just be able to do more. That was the fundamental thesis from day one. And we kind of had early indicators, I think, definitely with Hellblade. From Ninja Theory, that was a great example that kind of, made people think differently about what smaller teams could do. Plague Tale is another great example of a tight team that delivered an awesome experience. And our thinking was, could we, as a team of 40 people, deliver this kind of fantasy experience that we want? We wanted to do like 15 hours of gameplay with a packed story, a very cinematic story, with combat and upgrades and companions, 20 different enemy types and different bosses. And then we wanted to do themed puzzles for each chapter so that every chapter feels distinct. And then we also wanted to make sure that each chapter looks different. So you kind of feel like you're going through chapter for an episode. That was the big risk for us, was like, okay, is this even possible? And it was definitely painful, but possible. AAA studios have their place. A lot of people are like, this is the replacement for that. I don't necessarily think so. What I think is really changing is that smaller creators or smaller studios, whether it's indie or AA, are just able to deliver a more expanded experience than ever before.
And I'm always curious about the fact that there's so much magic in it, there's so much fantasy in it. How much has that part of the world evolved? Like how much of that magical element, like Rin, was she always supposed to have those magical elements? Was there more? Was there less? Like how does that evolution go?
Yeah, it all started with Rin. Rin and the world being connected was kind of the initial pitch that our writer brought to that evening where we were figuring things out. I knew immediately that I wanted to make a protagonist with powers, but I also wanted to make sure that there were drawbacks to those powers, that it felt like it was something that the main character was having to kind of struggle against, and something that wasn't just a straight plus or a straight pro. It had to have its own cons, and that played a big role into the arc of this character throughout the game, and kind of coming to terms with that and trying to understand it. And it's because it's also kind of a mystery to the protagonist. Like she's still learning what the power means, how can she use it, and it's something that we really kind of brought in as a core idea. And then we wanted to connect that to a fantasy world that also felt like it wasn't kind of solved or really just kind of perfect, but it was actually in the fallout of a big event in the past where things had kind of come apart at the seams, and the protagonist had to kind of play a role in that as well.
Like you mentioned, you guys built a mocap studio and all of this. So how is that like to work with actors in a mocap stage, making sure that all the data is captured in the right way and it goes to the character body and in the right way. Like, how is that whole experience like? Right?
It's difficult to describe the pains of making this all come together for the first time. It was not months, it was years just building the foundation, and then realizing, like, even as we put it together initially, that we just had to hit such a high quality bar with the visuals of the game in terms of the mocap animations and cinematography and lighting. Figuring that out was done to the very end, I think. But I think in terms of like working with the actors, it really helped that Aldís, the main protagonist of the game, is big into video games. So when we initially talked to her, she didn't need any explaining. Like, she was just, in from the first moment. And that really helped because she understood a lot of the kind of rotating bits. Even though she hadn't been casted before as a protagonist of the game, she understood the end product. And I think with the companion as well, Abram, who's portrayed by an Icelandic actor called Karl August, he just has such vast experience, and he's very known in Iceland for his long career here. And I think for Icelanders especially, it's really fun to see him in this kind of drama comedy role, because most of Icelanders know him from like this pure comedy side, which you can definitely see in the companion with how we write him.
Unreal Engine at this point is the one that pushing the boundaries for you guys. Like, you guys started at the time when Unreal Engine was still coming up, and it's still kind of, it was not even at that stage. Now it is a completely different ball game. How do you think is that and motion capture is helping guys like you like build these games to bring something innovative as compared to how it used to be that only AAA games could do?
When we did a school project, we originally did them in Unity. So we kind of made a decision at that time to switch to Unreal Engine, because we kind of saw the trajectory of what we wanted to do in terms of motion capture and photogrammetry and the style and just a 3D game and the fundamental systems for that. Unreal Engine really had the tools, and we needed efficiency. We need to have those tools in place. But I definitely think also that Unreal Engine is fantastic, but it's a complete misnomer that it's some sort of magic thing that makes the game come together. Like, it takes so many talented people working so hard to bring things together in a game like this, and Unreal Engine makes it possible. It doesn't really kind of create a shortcut past the fundamental layer of like, okay, you can do it, but then everything from there has to build on it.
How much time you really wanted to give or to make sure that all these scenes are as exactly accurate as it is to sort of compete, I suppose, because at this point, in some ways, you are maybe competing with some of the AAA level. Was that a thing that you were also having in mind, like, we have to keep the bar high?
So that's an excellent question, because the AAA games, like, I kind of think that we get compared a lot to them because we're bringing this package forward, but we didn't really think to ourselves we're making a AAA game. Like, that was not in our narrative. We were like, look at what a small team can now do. That's awesome. Like, let's create something new and exciting. So that comparison just kind of invites itself once you make a game like this. But it was definitely not something that we had in mind. In our heads, we were not like, okay, how can we make a AAA game as a small team? Our thinking was more like, how can we make this fantastic game with a small team?
In terms of combat, you have to balance, like, with magic powers and then sword fighting. How do you even come with to figure out a way to like balance these two things and to not make sure like, oh, this game focuses too much on magic or too much on just combat? Magic is just a little bit there. Like, how do you balance these two to make sure that it works in the best way possible along with the companion?
I remember this vividly because I was coming off the back of Witcher 3, one of my favorite games of all time. And I remember that I was just using Quen, the defensive shield ability in Witcher, like all the time. And I just kept thinking to myself, like, why can't I just use all of this skills interchangeably? And it's not a critique of their design, it's just their design choice. But I was just thinking, like, you know, I want to make a protagonist that can really use their spells more fluidly and often. And we wanted to make it in such a way that there was a balance between you having to strike the opponent and using your spells. And that's a big reason why we designed it in such a way that the way for you to regain mana is to attack and kill enemies, because that means that you can cast an X amount of spells, but at some point you kind of have to go back in. So it always kind of self-harmonizes because of that design choice.
I was mentioning earlier about conversations that these characters would have. Was that idea in the first place, in the first get-go, that there needs to be these two characters talking to themselves between point A to point B?
No, it was from the very get-go of the game, and we had to really balance that out in the early times of development. Like, we were trying to find the right balance of, you know, how often often do you have an encounter? How often do you have a puzzle? How often do you have traversal? And then we had to make sure that we had those speaking sections for character building, because you really can't develop a relationship during a puzzle. You don't want to be constantly bombarded while you're trying to think about, how do I get through this? And same in combat. You can definitely help enforce that relationship through those things and enforce character. The way that we did it is that we used, I believe, text to speech, like the Microsoft Sam voice, to time it, because we had to think about, okay, Rin and Abram have to run this section, and then they're going to have a conversation choice in the middle of it, and the longest conversation choice is going to add 20 seconds. So we need to make sure, if the player is going to sprint throughout the entire thing, are they going to get interrupted? And then we had to design systems for, okay, if they get interrupted, how do we do it naturally, so that it feels like the characters are just changing context because of something happening to them.
Like, I keep on talking about God of War a lot because that's something that I noticed so much in God of War, where it was interrupted, and then when the things got settled down, I'm going to resume the story, and somebody would resume the story. And that was something that I saw in this game as well. And I was like, okay, this is so cool, because that is done at a AAA level with a lot of budgets and a lot of work, a lot of time.
Yeah, we actually looked at Uncharted 4 for most of this. That was our big inspiration for the interruption and resume systems, because we had played the one level where they're on the Jeep and going in and out of the Jeep, and they have a lot of these kind of glottal stops that they use to stop and naturally resume conversations. And that's kind of where we picked that up, because in a lot of ways, one of the inspiration for the game definitely is Uncharted as well. We kind of wanted to make a classic adventure that was kind of chapter based. And so like when people ask me about the structure of the game, I kind of always point to like, it's a very similar structure to Uncharted. You go from very different level to very different level, and you evolve these characters and you do different things, and it's just supposed to feel like an adventure.
Now that the game is out, like, what are some of the things that you believe are the biggest learnings for you as development, handling the team as you worked on this game?
I think the team has definitely, because we're going through this together as a team for the first time, even though we have lots of experienced people coming from different studios, the thing that clicked for us about more than halfway through production is really to harmonize with each other and understand how to really work together to play to our strengths, and all the teams just work in harmony. That took a bit of time to build, because when you're working early on, that you're just are bound by some siloing, because someone's just building a fundamental system. They're not able to really focus on anything else. So as soon as we had those systems and we harmonized, that was really when things come together. So I think for us, that was the biggest learning, is just for us as a team to work together and solve these problems and really kind of trust each other in that sense. And I think, whatever we go on to do next and the next game, it's just such a vastly better foundation to go from, because we now have all these fundamentals built. For myself, it's hard to say exactly. There's 1,000 lessons that could be taken out of a process like this, because as I said, we came straight from university, so inevitably I run into every wall I can find along the way, and it is excruciatingly painful the entire way.